What's up and welcome back to Interpreting the Stars, where today we're doing another ranking video. This time we're covering all the films in the DCEU from worst to best. Now historically, this universe has always been kind of a mixed bag for me, but as a whole I've enjoyed most of them better than the first time that I saw them. There are a couple of ties on this list, so the tiebreaker comes down to which film is more enjoyable, not which one is technically better, because they're both scored the same. So in general, they are both as good as a general rule. But one might have a better bias score, which means that I enjoyed watching them more than the other. It'll make more sense as we go along, so let's get cracking. In 8th place, also known as last place, is Aquaman with a score of 73%. So first of all, 73% is not a terrible score. In general, it means that it was decent enough for what it was, but it was also not really a movie that I want to see very many times. A lot of that had to do with the stuff going on underwater, the CGI hair floating around in the sea, the people riding around on fish, the bright color palette, the Power Ranger looking villains. All of that was really distracting in a bad way, but in my opinion, what saved it was Jason Momoa as Aquaman, the way that action scenes were actually shot, and the adventure story itself about trying to find that ancient trident on land. So it's not a terrible film. It has its moments without question. It's just a little bit messy too. In 7th place with a score of 78% is Birds of Prey. I had a good time with this film. Again, 78% is not a bad score at the end of the day, but I think the reason why this film wasn't scored a little bit higher, at least for me, had to do with the strange editing style. Every time they introduce a new character, it would rewind the story to introduce them again and what they're all about, and it wasn't very smooth in its pacing because of that. I also wasn't the biggest fan of Ewan McGregor as a villain. I thought he was a little bit over the top for my taste, but I did like Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. She's usually pretty good at what she does. In 6th place, also scored 78%, is Shazam! So Birds of Prey and Shazam are both scored 78%, and this is where the first tiebreaker comes into place. The bias score for Birds of Prey was 74% and was 84% for Shazam, meaning as a whole, I had a better time watching Shazam than I did with Birds of Prey, even though the overall score was the same. Makes sense? Cool. Anyway, Shazam is the only film to really work for everybody, all ages, entire families, all that, which means it's the most similar to Marvel films in that manner. It's cheesy, absolutely, but Levi brings a level of spirit to the film that's always fun to watch. But I hardly think it's the best film in the universe. In 5th place at 82% is Suicide Squad. I've always enjoyed Suicide Squad, even though it has its issues, primarily with the villain and their motivation. Basically, the entire movie is pointless. If they didn't create the Suicide Squad in the first place, they would have never had the issue with the villain. I don't know if it's an oversight by the writers or what. It is just dumb, though. I did, however, love the Suicide Squad themselves, the characters. I love them. Their chemistry, the music, the colors, especially. It was the first DCEU film that I actually enjoyed. That changed with my rewatch, of course, but even with all the problems it has, I still really enjoy it. In 4th place with a score of 86% is Man of Steel. The first time that I watched Man of Steel, I was not a fan. It was too dark, too brooding. It was like Batman except with Superman's powers. But that's more on the surface and based on what you want to see from Superman. This was a real-world example of what might actually happen if Superman actually existed in real life, how the world would actually react, and what kind of implications would be in place because the world isn't like the movies or the comics. And that's one thing that this film did very, very well. It created a different perspective on a story that we already know and love, and the cinematography and the synthetic music made this film very, very good. In 3rd place, also scored 86%, is Wonder Woman. This is our second and final tie on the list, as both Wonder Woman and Man of Steel were both scored 86%, but the bias and the unbiased scores were actually switched for both of these films, meaning that Man of Steel's bias score was 84%, its unbiased score was 88%, and Wonder Woman's bias score was 88%, and unbiased score was 84%, meaning that Man of Steel was technically better, but Wonder Woman I slightly enjoyed more, probably because of the expectation and bias that I have with Superman. I can still enjoy Man of Steel a lot more now, but I still have an image in my brain of who he should be, and that image is light and hope, a character who can wash away the dark and brooding themes they specifically had in Man of Steel. Wonder Woman, though, for what it was exactly what I anticipated from the character. I'm not a huge Wonder Woman person by any means, but this movie was very, very good for the character, which was presented in the only way that I could ever see Wonder Woman presented. In 2nd place, at 89%, is Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Even as this film has a priority to introduce the world of the Justice League, I still think as a whole it's better than Man of Steel or Wonder Wonder Woman because we don't have to worry so much about origin stories anymore. And it's also a story that we've wanted to see ever since Christopher Reeve was Superman. We've wanted to see a Batman and Superman live-action film, which is what we finally have now. I also think Ben Affleck is the strongest as Batman in this movie because Justice League is a bit lighter, which works better for Superman, but not so much for Batman. So this was a decent Batman film above all else. At first place, at 91%, is Justice League. Some people don't like this movie, and that kind of baffles me. It's what I've wanted to see out of the DCEU since its conception, and what I've wanted to see ever since. It's light. It makes Superman a beacon of hope again. It's funny. Joss Whedon's soul shows up here and there, which lightens the mood to a place that I feel like it belongs. Nothing feels wrong here. It feels like these films were all leading up to this point, so it doesn't sacrifice the dark tones of the films before this. The only thing that makes this film imperfect is the villain's motivation, which seems to be a little bit too similar to that of Loki in the first Avengers film, and Steppenwolf's end goal isn't incredibly clear, and I suppose that has something to do with the lack of a Snyder cut, which maybe would have explained a few things, but as a whole, it's certainly not a terrible film. I had the most fun with this movie. And that's it. That's my ranking as it stands now for the DCEU. I'm sure my rankings differ from yours though, so let me know what you rank it in the comments down below. I'd love to see how others see the series. So leave those rankings down below. As for YouTube, you know what to do. Hit the subscribe button if you like this review and would like to see some others like it. Hit the thumbs up button because that always helps out my channel. And don't forget about the little bell icon because that'll help notify you when I come up with my next ranking video. And until then, peace out!